All right. Welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show. My name is Chris Curran. I produce podcasts for clients, and I also run Podcast Engineering School, where I teach people how to become a professional, work from home, and earn a great living from home. Did I mention they work from home and make their own hours and earn a great living from home? Yeah. Anyway, I'm excited for this episode. Definitely check out podcastengineeringschool.com. That's the website. You can also sign up for the emails that I send out. You can get it once a week as a roundup email or a couple times a week. I send out little tips and tricks for producing audio. It's really cool. I call them the Daily Goodie. And I call them the Daily Goodie because when I started doing it, I did it every day. But now, and when I say every day, I mean 7 days a week in the very beginning. That lasted literally 2 months, and then I went to 5 days a week, and now I'm at 3 days a week. So, putting out content's not easy, right? So anyway, my guest today is my friend and graduate of Podcast Engineering School, Barry Gary, who's the host of the Louisville Cycling Podcast. He produces actually several podcasts for himself and for other people. He's making some money doing it too, as sort of like a moonlighting thing for now. But Barry, welcome to the show, my brother.
Chris, it's great to be here again. I know it's been a minute since we've chatted, and a lot of water under the bridge, but I'm excited to be a part of the show again.
Right, I'm actually going to look up when you were on the show last. It was August 29th, 2019.
Okay.
Oh, so 3 years.
Yeah. A lot has changed since then.
Yeah, and that's why you're here. So this is great. So, and I hope everybody enjoyed the previous episode, or from 1 or 2 episodes ago, with Zach Haney. We talked a lot about business, and if you didn't hear that yet, and he connected using AirPods, and anyway, I tried to make him sound as good as I could. But if you listen to that, let me know how you think it sounds. It's a little rough right there. But so Barry, let's get into it then. Normally we start with your regular equipment and workflow that you record with for your show. Mm-hmm. So let's just start with that again. But you've said a lot's changed since in 3 years, right?
Yeah, a lot has changed, and I find that the more I do this, the more things simplify, and I narrow in on what I'm doing. Right now, I'm speaking into a Shure SM7B, which is the mic I use most of the time, and I've got a cloud lifter on it. It goes into I still use a DBX 286S, and then my interface is a Scarlett 1820i, which is bigger than I need, but it's funny. I got this because it fit into my rack where the other little ones didn't. So, really important reasons for that.
Yeah.
I've got the Yamaha monitors. I record everything into Adobe Audition, and that's where I do 90% of my editing. And that's pretty much the equipment setup right now.
Right. Yeah. Pretty cool. And I kind of want to say straightforward, but it's not really, because you're using the cloud lifter, which is very cool. We'll talk about that in a second. And you're using the 286S, and then you're using the Scarlett 18i20, which is, it's the Scarlett series. So it's basically the same quality as a Scarlett 2i2, only that it has 8 inputs, right? With 8 mic pre's and that kind of thing. I have one of those as well. All right, well, you got the SM7B. Now, someone might ask, why are you using a cloud lifter and a DBX 286S? And we all know the answer, because the SM7B microphone requires a lot of gain, right, Barry?
Yeah, well, when I first got this microphone, I thought there was something wrong with it. I was like, man, I can't get it to go loud enough. And of course, you read and you do all the things, and I figured out that I needed to help it a little bit. And so putting the cloud lifter on, and I don't do a whole lot of, I don't have to do as much gain with the DBX and the Scarlett, which I think probably is not quite as clean as some other gain, but I don't have to put as much onto it to get a high enough signal.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. This idea of gain staging between those 4 things: the SM7B, the cloud lifter, the 286S, and then the Scarlett 18i20. The cloud lifter is a gain booster, right? So it boosts the gain. Mm-hmm. How many dB? Do you remember? It's like 25 or something.
I think it's like 20. I think maybe 28. It's in that neighborhood. It's 20 something, but it's either 25, 26, 28, somewhere around there.
Yeah, which is really awesome. And then going into the 286S, of course, you have the mic preamp on the 286S. You probably have to add some gain there. But the point I want to get to is that on the Scarlett 18i20, which is your interface, you probably have that gain knob almost all the way down, right?
Right. Well, yeah. And when we first started tonight, I actually had it like almost all the way down and added just a little bit because my level is a little low, but really had it almost all the way down and was going through the 286S for most of the additional gain.
Right. Yeah, because the danger with that is because you're going through a couple, well, specifically the 286S has a mic preamp and the Scarlett has a mic preamp. So when you're preamping something up and then right after that you're doing it again, you got to be careful or else you'll obviously distort, right? You can easily distort it.
Yeah.
So that's cool. And so for your show, do you do solo episodes or interviews?
Most of my shows are interviews. The ones I do for myself, like the Louisville Cycling Podcast, is usually a one-on-one interview. Sometimes I get people to actually come in and sit with me. Most of the time, I'm using Riverside, just kind of like we are tonight, and talking to people remotely. It's, for me, most of the people that I talk to aren't podcast people. They're not audio people. They're cyclists. And so sometimes I run into issues around equipment and having things on their end. I've got a lot of people saying, well, yeah, I've got a microphone on my computer I can use, and getting them to use headphones and some sort of external microphone. So I have to do a lot of coaching and a lot of prep with people to help them sound as good as they can sound.
So you're doing a lot of that. Are you getting better at it?
I am. I mean, it's still. Again, my whole workflow has changed so much from the beginning. I think when I first started doing this, I think there's an arc. I went through the podcast engineering school and learned a whole lot. And of course, I want to put to use all those things I've learned. And so I found over time, I found that I was probably doing too much and maybe not helping my audio as much as doing less would do. Right. And so now I find that, I'm getting better stuff on the front end and doing more time coaching and helping people get a little better with their setup on their end and trying to capture the audio better. So I have to do less to it. And it's not only does it help me sound better, but it also helps me not have to spend, bukus of time to get something produced because I also have a full-time job. I've got my full-time job. I do my shows. I do 4 or 5 shows for external people. And it's kind of funny when I do work with a lot of businesses who I worked with them in another capacity and they, found out I got a podcast and they listened to my podcast. And then it's like, when they found out it doesn't sound amateurish, that it sounds like a professional podcast, they're like, well, we want to do that. Can you help us do that? And so I found myself sort of falling into a side business where I'm helping mostly organizations do podcasts for their organization, some internal, some public. But a big piece of that is also coaching them through deciding, what their show should be, because, there's a lot that goes into developing a podcast and deciding, one of the conversations I have to have with everybody is, what is your goals for your show? Because they think if they're not getting, hundreds and thousands of downloads, they're not being successful. But for a lot of things we're trying to achieve with some of our shows, it's really not about having thousands of downloads. It's more about getting the right message to the right audience. And so I found that I'm doing a lot of coaching around show development, but then that falls into me doing, probably, 90% of the whole production piece too. One of the things I've stopped doing for a couple of my clients because they have audio visual people is I don't go and do the recording on site anymore. I mostly just let them record and then I do the production after that because they've got people who understand how to get good sound and get something that I can work with.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, talking your clients through that show development that's such an interesting piece. There's a lot of wisdom in that area that's been figured out over the years, but like it really is, even now, like for guys like us, we've been podcasting for, I've been podcasting for a decade and I've been in the business for a decade. And still there are people who don't understand really what it is or what it can do for you. So that's up to us to tell these clients, like, this is a lot of things. It's not just, oh, how much is it costing me and am I getting it recouped and all that stuff. I mean, that's part of it, but it's not all of it, right?
Yeah. Well, and the real big conversation I have with folks revolves around a lot around audience. I mean, who are you wanting to talk to? Is this a podcast for your internal staff? You know, if that's the case, if you want to do a podcast, like I do a lot of podcasts in the healthcare space for a couple of major healthcare organizations, and one of them is called Plugged Into Nursing, and it's an organization that does a podcast for their nurses, and they've got probably 1,800 to 2,000 nurses in this organization. So you're not going to get 30,000 downloads an episode because you got to get them out of that mindset and say, okay, what are you trying to achieve with this for the audience you're talking to? What do you want your nurses to do or learn from this? It's not about downloads. It's more about how do you change behaviors and get messages you want for your organization to the audience in your organization that you want, and establishing that up front so that when somebody comes to you and says, why are you spending money on this podcast? You can say, well, because of this, this, and this. And it really helps. It's almost like managing a project. You've got to kind of have your project scope right up front and understand, why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, and what the outcomes you're looking for are before you ever get started. And then it's time to start developing the show.
Very interesting. So how do you feel personally? Like you're obviously doing a lot of the audio production. So there's the production side, but then there's this whole, you might call it sales. You're talking to potential clients and potential clients. You're kind of doing sales and project management skills. Mm-hmm. I know obviously you've been through PES. I know you're comfortable with the audio production side of things. And you're a world-class pro, actually, as you know. But how about the other side, that sales side, that project management? Do you find that more difficult, or you're okay doing it?
Well, my professional background is all in learning and organizational development. So my role has always been as the leadership development guy, the learning lead for organizations. And so my role has always been in that consultative fashion. And when people ask me what I do, I always say I help organizations perform better through learning. And there's a lot of crossover between when I'm talking to people about a leader's team and team development or things like that. That process of consultation is very similar to what I do when I'm talking to somebody about why do you want to do a podcast? What do you want to hope to achieve for it? Who are you talking to? What are your outcomes you're looking for? Now let's look and see, is this actually the best medium for that, or is there another medium for that? So it really falls in line with what I've done my whole career. So that piece is probably comes very natural to me because I've done it in a lot of other contexts. And I've done it for several organizations that I work with. I work with I'm the learning lead for a small nonprofit here in Louisville right now. And one of the challenges we have, and this is I think it's consistent in healthcare. There's a lot of people that work in healthcare organizations that don't sit at a computer all day. If you're a nurse, your job is on the floor taking care of patients. It's not being at a computer. One of the big challenges for an organization is how do I communicate with that person? I can't send them an email. They're very rarely going to go on our internal portal because they're not sitting at a computer. How do I get important information to those people? And audio content and podcast where they can just pull it up on their phone is a great solution for that communication problem in a lot of organizations. And so getting people to do one isn't that difficult. And relatively speaking, it's not very expensive in terms of other things that companies invest in a lot. And so the consultative and the sales part, really, it's not a difficult sell when you help people understand what they can achieve with it. And it's the hardest part for me is getting people to narrow in and understand that the more natural and the more they make it like a conversation where people are eavesdropping on them, the more interesting it is. If they try to script it too much, if they're reading something and trying to make it too, I'll say corporate, you're going to lose a lot of interest. So you've got to find a way to make it engaging, just like you got to make it sound good, and you have to make sure you're talking to the right audience and everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's very much like, so the nurses who are not near a computer, not sitting at a computer all day, providing a podcast for them, like if they're going to listen to, let's say 20 or 30 minutes of let's say once a week of a podcast, really that's almost equivalent to if they went into a meeting for 30 minutes and the boss could speak to them, speak to the group directly in a room. It's almost the same thing.
But the advantage is they can get that while they're driving to work.
Exactly.
And so one of the questions I get a lot, I said, how long should my podcast be? And I tell them, I said, well, look, here's what I know. I know that the average commute in the Louisville metropolitan area is 23 minutes. I would make my podcast, if I were trying to talk to my employee base, around 20 minutes. Because the last thing you want to do is have 5 minutes of your podcast left when you're sitting in the parking lot. But you also don't want to drive an extra 10 minutes with nothing to listen to. So let's target our commuting audience and say, we're going to give you something you can listen to when you come or go home from work. And little things like that help people say, well, gosh, they're trapped in the car anyway. Well, why not make it a time for learning? And so I do just a quick rundown. I do a podcast for nurses. The same organization does one called Medchat, which is a podcast that it's physicians talking to other physicians. And if you're a physician and you listen to it, you get, continuing medical education credit for listening to it. I do an internal one for a healthcare organization that's about their no harm project called Reaching for Zero, because you're always striving for zero harm. I do one called Parenting with You, which is, a pediatrician and someone in Norton Children's Health and Wellness talking about issues around parenting kids. There's another organization called Parent MD that is an organization for parents of children where they get access to, pediatrician experts around different childhood topics all the time. And so I've really carved out a niche in the healthcare space. And then I got my Louisville Cycling Podcast and getting ready to start a new podcast with my son. Because he's a sports gambler. And so there's a couple big, sports teams around here. And so we're gonna do a podcast around sports gambling, and he's going to be talking about some specific schools here and help people, get their bets ready every week for things like college football and college basketball and things like that. And he's a really energetic and fun kid, so it'll be fun along the way too. And he's very opinionated. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice that you guys can do that together.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been looking for an excuse. We had a couple different ideas. We were going to do one where we approach a topic from two generational perspectives and talk about it.
Right.
So we're, but we've kind of landed on maybe doing a little sports betting assistance.
Well, that's kind of exciting because it's getting so popular, right? The sports apps and the betting and a lot of people follow sports. Like it's not just like, a couple million people. It's like so many people. It's like half the population or something.
And even right here in Louisville, I mean, we've got University of Kentucky, University of Louisville. There's some big, especially when you get into basketball, there's some big basketball schools. But there's also some competitive schools around football and some other sports and things. And so there's a good opportunity to talk to some local folks, but also do some things a little more national.
Nice. And it's legal to bet on college games?
It is in some places. And okay. Almost anybody can bet now. There are apps you can bet on all day long, almost everywhere. And, again, in Kentucky, it's not necessarily legal, but, I can drive 5 minutes and be across the river in Indiana where you can do legal sports betting. Okay. So I always know when my son's betting heavy because there's a toll bridge that goes to Indiana and I get all these like toll clicks on my phone. I'm like, dude, you got to buy your own ticket.
Oh, man. All right. So I wanted to ask you more about the workflow changes you were talking about in your production workflow. You said one thing you mentioned was that you stopped going on site to record. Are there any other workflow changes in the past 3 years?
Yeah, there's been some pretty significant changes. One of the biggest changes, especially since I've been doing several shows now, is that once I get the recorded audio, I do most of my editing in Audition, and I really only work with the interview tracks, just the raw interview tracks, and I produce those, mix them down, to a file, and then I've got a template set up for every show that I do, and once I get the interview file all mixed and put together, I just dump it in that template, render it, and I'm ready to go. And so I'm saving a lot of time by not trying to do the whole thing at once. I really just focus on the editing of the interview and then just drop that file into my template, and that saves a lot of time. I'm getting better at. I used to have to go. I would record in one program. I would edit in one program. Then I would mix in one. I used to be working with too many different, DAWs and programs and things between Twisted Wave and Audition and different things. Now I pretty much do everything in Audition. The only other really piece of software that I use religiously is Isotope RX. Now I've got RX10. I use that for cleanup. That's always my first step, is just clean everything up and bring it up to the same level so I can dump it into Adobe Audition and start doing the editing on it. But I found that I'm probably about, it probably takes me about half the time to produce a show than what it did when I first started, and which is good because I'm still getting paid the same. But I've got a raise per hour.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting how and this is what I talk about at PES a little bit, is like each person, you find your own rhythm, you find your own little workflow. And there are obviously several common workflows that work really well, but like sort of discovering that yourself that brings you to another level of competence in so many ways. You know what I mean?
Well, and the big thing too is, there's a whole world of plugins and things you can do, and finding out that, at least for me, I've found that getting proficient at a few things is a lot better than trying to put a lot of things on a track. And now I record a lot better than I did at the beginning. So I'm working with better audio, and so I have to do less to it. And right now, other than a little compression, a little EQing, and if I have to, I'll go to a de-esser or a deplosive and things like that, and add those. But if you coach people well enough on the recording part of it, I've really gotten rid of a lot of that too, because I'm getting better at helping people understand, how to speak into the microphone and everything. And so I would say most of my audio is compressed and EQ'd a little bit, and not a whole lot else.
That's so good. That's like the best way to record and produce audio, is to record it properly in the beginning. Record good audio. That alone is probably, I don't even know, 75% of the battle.
Yeah, well, and
80%.
And I know I've had a couple times when I've been recording, and you show up in a room, and it's a conference room with bare walls, so it's very echoey. And then we get halfway into the interview, and it gets to be around noon, and I realize that the break room for lunch is right above us, and so you got all the chairs squeaking across the floor and all these things, and and I managed to clean it all up, but it took what usually takes me probably 15 minutes in Isotope was a 2-hour ordeal trying to get it usable. And
right.
and so then I made a note in my little prep for people to talk about where we're going to be in the facility and what goes on around that room, because you want to be in the right room.
Yeah, you have to avoid that situation.
Yeah.
And by coordinating it in advance, it's just so important.
Yeah, my pre-flight checklist is getting longer.
Yeah, your story, by the way, about that room brought me back to when I was producing some shows for Forbes about 5 years ago. And some of this audio was recorded with a Blue Yeti in a conference room with city traffic you can hear out from outside the window. It's a form of torture, actually, trying to have somebody clean that up.
Well, and if you can imagine, and again, trying to coach the behavior of physicians to do the things you want them to do when their tendency, you're like, okay, now you got to stay close to the mic. You got to, point it right at the corner of your lips. And they're like this. Yeah, perfect. And they start talking like, well, when I was in medical school.
Yeah, they lean back is what Barry's doing on camera.
They lean back, and then you go closer. Then okay, well, when I was in medical, and then they, so they're like,
then they get way too close.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's a little bit, I'm fortunate because the person I have doing most of the recording at this one company now, we spend some time together, and he's really a video guy, but he understands about how to get the sound. And so he usually gives me good audio. And when I get it, I always chat back and forth with him and say, okay, here's a little something I want you to do differently next time, because maybe it's a little too hot, maybe it's not loud enough, maybe you need to remind people to stay on the mic. And so I kind of coach him too in terms of how he can coach the speaker so that we get the best sound.
Yeah. That's so good. It's like teaching hosts over prolonged periods of time, just giving them just keep sort of recommending these little tips or correcting them in small ways over months. It's like you're honing them into a talented host, right?
And it's funny you say that, because one of the hosts that I did a lot of work with, we were talking one day, and I was on my phone. I said, well, and they're like, man, you always telling me to do stuff all the time. I said, well, I said, give me a minute. Let me show you something. And I went back and I pulled up our first episode. I said, I want you to listen to yourself on episode number 1. And they're like, and she was embarrassed. And I said, now we're 40 episodes in. Listen to our last episode. She goes, yeah, you're right. Yeah. She goes, please keep telling me.
Oh, that is so nice.
Yeah.
How brilliant is that? Like, if people could do that in their regular lives too, it's like, go look at yourself 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like,
well, and at the end of the day, and again, especially if you're doing a podcast for organizations, I mean, the people who are on your podcast have, some skin in the game for that organization. They want to put something out there that makes them look good to their peers, right? So they want to sound good. They want the content to be good. They want, they want it to be something they can be proud of and get a little recognition for. And I feel like part of my role is to ensure that they're able to put their best selves, forward and really get, because the thing I want to hear the most is that people are telling them they love the podcast, that they're getting something out of it. And I feel like if I can help coach them toward, being successful in it themselves, well, they're going to continue to keep doing it and keep paying me to help them do it.
Totally. So I wanted to actually ask you about the final steps of production, like the mastering and the tagging and uploading to the media hosts and stuff like that. Do you take care of all that stuff for all of your clients, or how does that work?
Yeah, for all of my clients, right now, all of my clients, I'm really a turnkey, solution for them. So I
got it.
I do it all. I manage their Apple, Connect ID. I manage their, we use Libsyn. I use Libsyn for almost everything. I manage their Libsyn account, and so from once I get the audio files, I say, well, tell me what date you want it to publish, and I do the rest. They'll send me the the show notes and things that they want to put in, but I pretty much do everything from that point forward. And all that back end stuff doesn't really take long just to upload. And I still, one of the things I still do is I still use Auphonic. I've got the desktop Auphonic that I still use.
Oh, nice.
To get to my MP3, just because it's so easy to do. And so that's usually my final step. I kind of do everything in Auphonic, and then just upload it. And a lot of times I'm usually working a little ahead of schedule. So I usually publish it in Libsyn to publish on a certain date. And it's the other coaching point that sometimes I have trouble with, is helping them understand that if you publish on a consistent schedule and people can expect it to show up, it helps, rather than just, putting things out there when you get to it. Yeah.
Oh, that's so big. It's crazy, right? Just same. If it's a weekly show, every week, same time. I used to do that. I did that for years, but for my show. But something happened in 2022. I had something changed, and I'm still doing my show, obviously, but it's a little different. It's okay.
Well, and it's the same with my show. When I first started doing my podcast, it was real easy, and I feel like I had a little more time, and I did a lot of stuff in person, and it was not just the podcast, but it was also reconnecting with people in the cycling community. But now I feel like I'm always rushed to get the next episode out, and so I've been a little less consistent than I'd like to be, but that's just my own fault.
Right. Yeah. Same here. Mm-hmm. So, did you mention where you're tagging your final MP3s?
Well, I go through and I do a few things. Well, I'm not sure I do a lot of tagging.
Oh, okay. Because I know in Auphonic, you can actually put in metadata and you can tag it in Auphonic. Yeah.
Well, I put a few things, but I don't do a lot. I mean, it's probably something I should pay more attention to for discovery and all those kind of things. But other than basic keywords and things like that, I don't do a lot.
Yeah, and so I believe that most people don't even tag their stuff, properly. I'm doing air quotes with properly. And from what I understand, and I mentioned this last episode, I think that it doesn't. Most of the player apps that play the podcast, they don't get the image and the title. They don't get the metadata from the tag of the MP3. They get the metadata from the podcast feed. Mm-hmm. So even if you produce an MP3 and you don't tag it at all, obviously it has to have a file name.
Right.
But besides the file name, there's no other tagging. It'll still show up in any podcast player, and all the the artwork will be there and the show notes and everything. Yeah. Yeah,
and on mine, I don't. Most of the podcast I do, the artwork and all those things don't change from episode to episode. They don't do different artwork for each episode. It's always their same, because again, it's their organizations. Yeah. They want their branding and things out there. Yeah. So nothing really changes. And so all that, I have it all in Libsyn, and when Libsyn puts it all together, everything shows up like it should.
Yeah, that's great. Any ideas for any upcoming purchases for you?
Yeah, well, the only thing I've been I've been playing with a little video, and so I've really been thinking about getting some good wireless lavalier mics. I've got the the small Rode that you can clip on like a lavalier and thing. It records.
Oh, the Rode
R1 or something like that. I forget what it's called. It's
the Go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's packed in the box. I'm getting ready to move sometime soon too. And I've used some lavalier mics for one of my clients that does a lot of video, and they roped me into doing some of their video for them too. They said, "Well, do you know how to put all this stuff together?" And I ended up, kind of doing some self-instruction with YouTube and all that kind of stuff, and figuring out how to use the lavalier mics with my Zoom recorder. Mm-hmm. I'm having a FN8 recorder and some picking up the audio and then blending it together in Premiere Pro. And so I've been thinking about doing getting some for myself to use, because where I'm working my full-time job, again, I'm still in a learning capacity, and I'm getting ready to start doing some audio and video educational things there. And so I'm looking at equipment to buy for the office.
Wow. Yeah.
Now for myself, I keep thinking maybe I could take these DBXs out and take this Scarlett out and get one really nice Neve, go ahead and spend the money to get something really nice that I can just keep forever, and clean up my setup here a little bit too. But
right.
But I just bought a house, so it's going to be a Bennett.
Oh, okay. You just bought a house. Good for you, man.
Yeah, it's a big time. We are condensing two households into one, so it's a big move in a lot of ways.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome, man. I'm so glad you're working with these organizations and your clients and stuff. It's really good to see you out there really helping people, man. Like on a deeper level than just, okay, I'll just take some ums out of your podcast. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, and I'm really looking forward to some of the work I'm going to be doing for I work for. It's called Home of the Innocents. It's a it's a really good organization here in town that cares for some of the most at-risk children in our community and families. And one of the challenges has always been leadership development because they're a small organization, don't have a lot of funds, and can't always bring people together because a lot of the leaders are also direct caregivers. And so I'm really starting to think more about how audio can play a role in our development of leaders in the organization, and starting to put some things together that I think it's going to be extremely influential and impactful for our organization in terms of being able to get content to leaders in ways that they haven't been able to access before.
Yeah, that's such a fascinating idea, the internal podcast, like you create a podcast within the company, and the podcast is just for the employees. That's it. And then you can not only provide education, but you can give, you can talk about anything new that's coming up. You can talk about you could even talk about company policy from time to time, mention anything like that. So and if you did it in a good, a concise way with a little, and like you said, more conversational instead of, giving a speech, then it's pretty fascinating.
Well, and I think if I worked for a sales organization where we had salespeople out and about all the time, if I worked for a kind of a global or a geographically dispersed organization, you really can have a lot of impact. And some of the, being in the learning field, some of the reading I've done and research around audio content, there's actually some good science around audio retention as long as the audio quality is good. There's a couple studies that I read. One that I use a lot with people that, there was a gentleman that was giving the exact same, speech or talk to people. And everything about this, it was video and people were watching it. Everything about this was exactly the same, except in one, the audio was very high quality, and one, the audio was, pretty crappy. And when they surveyed the audiences, and the exact same person, exact same speech, everything exactly the same, they said the content was much more believable and the speaker much more credible. With the bad audio, they did not believe the speaker and they did not believe the content. And the only difference was the audio. And so I started thinking about, well, I hear a lot of bad audio when people are sharing with me things they're doing, in places where they decide I want to do a podcast, so I'm going to get, my Blue Yeti and I'm going to, just send it up to, I don't know, just someplace and put it out there, and it sounds, pretty horrible. And talking to people and helping them understand that the quality of the audio really matters, not just for your own, sense of pride in doing a good job, but also really in terms of how credible you come off to your audience. If you sound bad, you don't sound credible. And when people hear the difference between their content sounding crappy versus their content sounding well-produced, they start to get it. And especially for audiences, and I do this all the time. I still listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's several of them that I'll turn off in the first 30 seconds because it's just not listenable. And it's just the audio. They may be great podcasts, but I just can't listen to it.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to listen to a lot of shows. I was just thinking about that I think it was in the shower today. I was thinking about when I was driving I think I was going to Podcast Movement or Vegas or LA. It must have been Vegas. But anyway, I went through Utah, and I was driving through Utah, and the speed limit on Route 80 through Utah is 85. It was weird. It's weird to see it on the sign. I'm like, did that just say 85 miles an hour?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. So anyway, I was driving fast, and there was a lot of road noise when you drive that fast, right? And so I put on a podcast, and it was I couldn't hear it. I had to turn it up so loud, then it was blowing my ears out. So I put on another podcast. I tried 5 until I got one different episodes of different shows.
Yeah.
And till I could listen to, I forget which one it was, but I don't know, That's not good. I mean,
No, it's not good. And there are some podcasts that I really want to listen to. They're really good. The topic, the content's really good. But the whole time I'm listening to it, I'm so distracted by the sound that I don't get what I could out of it. And I had a similar experience to you. I just got back Sunday night. Me and some friends, we took a motorcycle trip down to Florida, 900 and almost 1,000 miles in one day.
Whoa.
And listening to podcasts the whole way. Of course, there's tons of road noise and stuff like that on a motorcycle. So, listening to the podcast on the way down there, you really have to have, first of all, you have to find some that are compressed and loud enough to really be able to hear well. And there's several that I have that I knew I could listen to all the way down there and not have a problem. And so, so I was on the motorcycle for 12, 14 hours and pretty much listened to podcasts straight through.
Wow.
And yeah, it's amazing. I learned a whole lot. I'm probably so full of trivia right now. It's all useless information, but a lot of it.
No, it's all good. Wow, that's a long drive. I just did a similar drive to that, to Florida. I did 2 days like that.
Yeah.
Like 14-hour days. It's like, that's a lot, man.
It is. It's a lot. And it's a little closer from Kentucky than it is Colorado, but it's still a pretty good haul on a motorcycle.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. On a motorcycle, that's an insanely long trip.
But it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah. Oh, so how much do you ride your bike around? You ride your bike a lot?
I do. I mean, I put probably, I don't know, I put more miles probably on my motorcycle than I do my car. So I ride quite a bit, and I've always been kind of fascinated by two wheels. Of course, I'm a cyclist. I ride bicycle, 5-6 times a week. And then ride them. And maybe that's why I don't have as many episodes out during the summer as I usually do, because I'm always out doing something. And I find that once the time changes in October and it gets dark later, it's amazing how more productive I am because I'm in the house earlier. And so I'm looking forward to some good productive winter months.
Yeah, That's the cycle. Well, Barry, this has been really awesome. I want to include all the links that you want me to include in the show notes. So any of your shows that you just told us about, or any links to your shows, definitely send that to me. I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah. And this has been great, man. A lot of great information in this episode. Thank you, man.
Well, and Chris, I really appreciate it. And just to put a plug in for you, I really appreciate the foundation you gave me through podcast engineering school. And I certainly would not be able to do what I do without that. The best thing was it was kind of like a quick going from here up several levels in a few weeks. And so it was kind of like I've got an MBA, and I went to this executive MBA program, which was 18 months, which was kind of a crash course, get in, get out, get it done. I kind of feel like, it's almost like an executive audio course where you go in, you get what you need. It's very useful. There's a lot of practice, and really having that foundation has given me the opportunity to go out. And again, I don't solicit business. I talk to people and say, I go, well, yeah, I've got a podcast, and I'll listen to it. And they come back to me and go, wow, that was really kind of cool. I mean, we kind of want to do a podcast. What do I do to do a podcast? And as soon as I hear that, I go, well, here's a client, and it goes from there. And so it's, my biggest struggle right now is trying to keep all the balls in the air.
All right. Well, you seem to be doing well so far, so keep it up. Barry Gary from the Louisville Cycling Podcast. Thanks, man. This is awesome.
All right, Chris, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. See you, Barry.